thank you very much for coming and talking to me today. Could you please just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Katherine. I'm studying abroad at Pembroke for the year, and I'm from outside of Washington, D.C. in the United States, and I go to Wellesley College in Massachusetts. So I study art history, and this summer I did an internship at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice, which we'll talk about more.
Excellent, yeah. So tell me about that. What kind of work were you doing there?
So when I was working at the Peggy Guggenheim, I was doing kind of very general administrative tasks, guarding in the galleries, doing kind of some more, I would say, a little bit more boring stuff, but then on top of that, the really exciting part was giving talks and tours of the collection. So one thing that I really enjoyed was being able to give private tours, and I kind of had to learn the collection front to back and had to be able to answer questions for any visitor who came into the galleries, but also be able to kind of weave a narrative through the whole collection so that I could kind of lead somebody through and give them the whole story of how the collection was built by Peggy herself, and also how each artist kind of created their specific work that I was talking about, and how that work interacts with all the other works in the room, and how these kind of movements were built in Europe and in the United States.
Okay, fantastic. So kind of on that note, could you tell me a little bit about the story of the Peggy Guggenheim Collection?
Yeah, so Peggy Guggenheim, she was part of the Guggenheim family, which was a fairly wealthy family, but she herself wasn't super wealthy. Her dad died on the Titanic, actually, and she kind of consequently didn't inherit as much money as the rest of the Guggenheim family. But with that small amount of money, small, really not very small, but she started to collect art. And she, right before World War II broke out, and she was in France, and she was kind of collecting art from all these artists who were trying to sell their art and escape to the United States. And so that's how she kind of started her collection. And then she moved to the United States, to New York, opened a gallery, and from there she kind of birthed the abstract expressionist movement herself, because she had examples of abstract and surrealist art from Europe, and she was showcasing them in her gallery, and all of these young American artists got to see it and kind of were inspired to create their own art.
Sounds like a fantastic person. Sounds like a great place to work.
Yeah.
What kind of art is in the Peggy Guggenheim collection? What kind of artists were you working with when you were giving those tours?
Yeah, so there was kind of a cubist room where we'd always start with the tour. And in there we had Picasso, and we had Duchamp, and a few other artists that kind of were foundational in the beginning of abstract art. And then there are two rooms with surrealist art. So in there we had Dali, Magritte, Yves Tanguy, and Jean Miro. And through that, you could kind of see the evolution of surrealist art leading up to the Second World War. And then we had abstract expressionist art from American artists kind of following that almost immediately. And in that we had Alexander Calder, and specifically the highlight of the collection is Jackson Pollock, because Peggy Guggenheim kind of kickstarted his career, and she funded him. She kind of gave him a stipend to allow him to quit his job and work full-time on his art. So there was a whole room dedicated to Jackson Pollock's work.
Fantastic. Well, yeah. I didn't know that. There we go. So that's Peggy Guggenheim. How about you? What's your interested in art history? What kind of eras are you interested in?
So I'm interested in classical art and also modern art. And while I'm here, I'm taking Gothic art this semester, and then art this term, and then next term I'm taking surrealist art. And so I'm trying to kind of fill in the gaps in my knowledge, but I really I'm very passionate about classical art and modern art, and I'm kind of torn between the two in terms of what I want to pursue in the future. Mm. But while I was in Venice, it was a great opportunity to kind of get a taste of both, because I was working at this incredible modern museum, but kind of around all these, in Venice, not specifically classical, but a lot of early medieval art, and around Italy, I was able to travel to different places where there were examples of classical art that I could get to see in person.
And what is it about art that you find particularly engaging, the kind of questions you're interested in asking?
Mm-hmm. With classical art, I'm really interested in kind of how different monumental architecture, like different types of monumental architecture, really communicate what the people in power were trying to do, and how they wanted to run their empire, because you can see kind of their ideology through the art that they created. And with modern art, I'm really interested in kind of how the artist is trying to communicate with the viewer. And especially, I really love surrealism, which is why I'm so excited to take this class next term, because of all the tiny little symbols in each painting where you can really, the more you look at it, the more things reveal themselves to you. And you kind of, I love art where each time you look at it, something new is revealed, and you kind of are continuously having a new experience with it.
Excellent. And you're, studying abroad. You've been to Venice, and now you're here in Cambridge. Are you enjoying that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the opportunity to travel around. Before this past year, I had never been really outside of North America. I'd been to Canada, but aside from that, I hadn't really been outside the United States very much. And getting to kind of travel around Europe and see all this art that I've been studying in a classroom is really amazing, because obviously in the United States, we don't really have much art or architecture that's from before, the 1700s. So coming here and getting to see these incredibly ornate and old Gothic buildings and different classical monuments that just they're so old and amazing. Really, it's incredible to see kind of humanity in its in older forms in the way that I can't really see it back home.
Yeah, great. It's a strong recommendation for studying art history in the UK, I think there.
Yeah.
The last question really is, what next? What are you hoping to do in the future?
Yeah, I have a few different career options that I'm thinking about right now, but I'm interested in maybe doing academia, being a professor, and kind of trying to work on art history in a more full way. But I also am interested in maybe working in a museum like I did this summer, or even doing something related to writing about art, art criticism, that kind of thing I think is really interesting. So I'm keeping my options open, and I know with an art history degree you can kind of go anywhere, so I'm excited for what's to come.
Great. Well, all the best with that, and thank you for